All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Carly. I'm the Events and Community Partnerships Lead here at Learnit. And with me, I have our amazing instructor and an expert in presentation skills, David Lieberman, as well as my colleague, Marissa, our Events and Community Coordinator, and Ben, our amazing Operations Manager, who is running everything behind the scenes. So we're really thrilled to have you all here for our session this Friday morning on Present Data Like a Pro. For those of you that are new to Learnit, welcome. A little bit about us. We are a learning and development organization based in San Francisco, California. We deliver all of our workshops virtually, live online, that are highly interactive to help you learn the skills needed to thrive in the economy of today and also the economy of tomorrow. And if you're a seasoned veteran of Learnit, if you're a client, a student, someone who's been attending these sessions week over week, welcome to you as well. We're thrilled to have you back. And just a little bit about this program specifically that we run on Friday mornings and how this kind of fills into everything else we do here at Learnit. So we run these weekly community events. They are 45 to 60 minutes every Friday morning. The monthly theme this month is data visualization and presenting your data. So if you've been following along for the last 3 weeks, we've really been focusing on learning the tools to actually organize your data, to create clean visuals. So we learned Power BI, we learned how to do some analysis in Excel, and put those all together to create charts and visuals and even fun dynamic graphics. And now we're really thrilled to have David here to show us how that translates into being a really strong presenter and how we can tell a story with the data that we've worked so hard to kind of clean up and create visuals with. And more on that, I'll speak more on that later, but these sessions are led every week by subject matter experts and guest speakers. And just a couple of simple housekeeping things here. We will be providing the recording to this session. It will be available in our free online community called Offsite. Again, I'll share more about that after the session. And one more thing is if you do have questions, there is chat live in YouTube. You can go ahead and add your chat in there. And Marissa and I will be going through those as we go along. And David will leave time for questions throughout the session. But Marissa and I will capture those. Because we had such a high demand for this session, we are live streaming via YouTube. So we're not in a Zoom room, but we will be taking your questions in that same light to make this really interactive and fun. As we like to do it in these community workshops. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce all of you to David Lieberman. David is an educator, an instructional program designer, a longtime project manager, and communication expert. And David, we've been lucky to have him kind of leading our learning and development and curriculum team for about 18 years now. David, you might have the exact count there. But David consults for Fortune 500 companies and emerging companies. So he works directly with some of our largest clients to really design meaningful programs, specifically on the professional development and the soft skills side. So we're thrilled to have him here and to have him leading this short 45-minute session for us today. So with that, go ahead and take it away, David.
Thank you so much, Carly. What an interesting sort of topic to get into, because when we dig into data, when you talk to a data scientist, most of us, when we think about data, what we really think about is numbers, right? You're like, oh, let the data tell a story. And you've got this envision of like a movie where it's like, boop, 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 boop. And then like numbers jump out of the screen and all of a sudden make connections there. And that's not what it is at all. Right. So at Learnit, what we're really interested in is not so much what somebody wrote in a book or what a current blog trend is. What we're interested in is what does the science say is real? And then what can you do with it? And presentation is kind of a big, big crux of science and then using the science. And let's start right here. That when we're talking about data, we are talking about data in the same way that data scientists are talking about data. And when they say data, what they really mean is any kind of information, right? So for example, a number, for sure, that's data. Also, someone's opinion is data. Whether or not it's good data is based on the person and what they know and all that kind of good business as well. And so when we're presenting with data, what that really means is that we're presenting information in a way that comes across as clear and concise and helps us get what we want, right? So at Learnit, our main business, we do live workshops where you participate in a workshop and there's lots of back and forth discussion and learning and discovery and trying things on and making plans to use things moving forward. We get real work done in the workshops. And so today you might consider sort of mimicking that as we go and thinking about something that you might present for. So we're talking about something real, right? So this could be something that you want your boss to say yes to, or maybe showing a client, or it might just be bringing a report and bringing data to people. You know, data scientists talk about data barf, which means blah, blah, blah. There's just so much data on the screen that it just overloads us. Much of what we'll do today is not so much this is how to put a number on the screen. You know, everybody knows how to put a number on the screen. Instead, this is how to build a presentation that gets you what you want, utilizing data as we move forward. And I think that we have to first acknowledge that just saying, hey, go present, that's easy. And wow, presenting is scary, isn't it? There's a really interesting study that the Chapman University does every year about fear. What are people the most afraid of? And you know what comes up number one every year? Well, I guess you do because it's on the screen, right? What comes up the most every year is public speaking. And then death is usually number two. People are more afraid of public speaking when they start thinking about it. It brings up more anxiety than thinking about death. That's kind of a trip, isn't it? The dentist is usually somewhere pretty close in that line as well. You know, it's not really that weird that people are having that fear relation there. As pack animals, as social animals, all social animals perform some sort of ostracism where they decide that they don't like this individual, that individual's out, and then usually what happens is that individual dies. Right? So if you find that you've got some fear around public speaking and you're like, why? And you feel guilty or like it's irrational. I mean, we're built for that. We're built to be very, very careful when everybody's on us, right? When the attention is on us. And so to just try to ignore that is not really the way to go. Now, the long-term way through that is like everything else, it's practice, right? So if you have an organization near you like Toastmasters, where basically what you do is go and give some sort of presentation over and over and over again, then that is the way through it. And there's some short-term things that you can do as well, that you can do while you're presenting or directly before you're presenting. My favorite is really interesting. It comes from studies about anxiety, actually, and anxiety therapy more specifically. So what they've found, and you can experience this right now, is that generally when your brain does something, your voice tends to follow what your brain is doing, right? So for example, when my brain starts getting very anxious and pop, 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 you know what I mean? Like that feeling of everything's moving very fast and big in your brain. Well, the sound wave that follows that is very fast and big. You know, your voice goes up like that, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Right? So what's neat is that our voice tends to follow what our brain is doing. When our brain slows down, our voice slows down or sometimes just stops. Now, what's even cooler is it works going in the other direction as well. If you go like this right now, you will feel your brain get all excited, right? Try it. I mean, I know we're around the world sitting in front of our desk and say something kind of like that, or even just imagine yourself saying something kind of like that. It's interesting, isn't it? Well, here, check it out. What's really neat is that when you're in a difficult situation, which maybe that's public speaking or even on a hard conversation, if you smooth out your voice, it tends to smooth out your brain as well, right? So when we talk about smooth out your voice, we're not necessarily talking about like, hey, ladies, like not really that kind of smooth. Instead, we're talking about that sort of AM radio host or that NPR host, like, hello, my name is David Lieberman. And then you notch it back a little bit so it's not super cheesy. You know what I mean? What we're talking about is smoothing it out. When you're in a difficult spot, you're in front of people, you're feeling weird, smoothing your voice out like I'm smoothing my voice out right now calms us down and allows us to keep up with our brain and keep up with our voice. Now, you can also, of course, put in personality. You don't have to lose your personality because you're smoothing. You can be fun and smooth, right? You can be very caring and smooth. You can be thoughtful or conscientious or smooth, can't you? It's the number one trick. Now, here's another trick, which works very, very well when you're standing in front of people, especially. And what's also interesting is that it works while you're sitting at a desk. It's about where your hands are. You know, when we get nervous, we tend to play with our hands. We do things like this. We touch ourselves here. We mess around with this. We do things in our pockets. There's all kinds of little yucks that we do with our hands, yeah? One public speaking trick is to turn your hand up. So for example, right now, wherever you are, sitting at your desk or looking on your mobile, if you turn one of your hands up, just turn it up. They don't really know why this works. It does tend to calm you, and it makes you look more giving. You know, it's a very giving gesture. That's an imploring gesture, isn't it? People tend to listen more. Evolutionary psychologists say it's because you can see that there's not a weapon in the hand. Other people who study body language say, well, we tend to do pacifying gestures when we're anxious, right? You're like, oh, or huh, you fiddle around with stuff. When your hand is turned up like that, you can't do any of that. Interesting, isn't it? Right? So what we're doing is preparing ourselves to be able to present in a way that feels good and feels smooth. We can all talk just fine when we're with people that we know, right? So until we become comfortable in front of a group, using some tools or techniques can always be useful. So I'm going to take a second and reach out to Carly and see if there are any questions that are popping up in the chat. Carly, any questions we might address right now?
No, David, not quite yet. Yeah, it's just great to see we have people from all the way from Missouri to China. So really diverse audience here. Missouri
to China. I kind of wonder if you drew a line where we'd end up there. We'll have to figure out where the farthest line is from different cities. That'll be neat. Very nerdy. All right. So, all right. So, hey, another thing. While we're presenting nowadays, many of us are presenting from home or from an isolated office, right? And so that's a little bit weird as well. Probably the biggest tip with that, aside from, hey, let's look at the camera, like I'm looking at the camera right now. You notice I'm not all like, yeah, and then another thing is this and another thing is that, right? Probably the biggest thing. More than one monitor makes a big, big difference, right? That way we can project what's on one monitor, like we're doing right now, and on the other monitor, right below my camera. I've got notes and the slide deck and the speaker notes and all that kind of good business, so I can see what's coming up next. One of the big things about presenting data, and we'll start jumping into tips in a second, is, man, if you show somebody a bunch of data, you know what they're going to do? They're going to read it. So you show them a bunch of data and then you slowly go through it. Man, just even thinking about that is horrible, isn't it? So what we'll end up doing is showing data in a strategic kind of way. And to be able to do that, you need to know what's coming up. If you haven't memorized your presentation, and I mean, who does that? Who memorizes every presentation they give? The answer is nobody, right? So what you'll probably want to have is a second monitor that you can use for projecting. Making sense? Great. So if you're one of those people who are like, can I just please have some tips about presenting data? Well, cool. Here you go. Here are some tips about presenting data, specifically on slides. And probably the most important one, and it is the most important one, is what we were just talking about. That if you show somebody a whole bunch of data and then slowly read through it, what a snooze fest. It doesn't matter how exciting your data is. People will read, you can't stop them from doing it, right? So here's the number one tip about presenting data. It's you only show the data that you're presenting right now. So right now, right? So for example, kind of like I'm doing right now, right? There are 2 more tips here, and I guarantee you'd be reading them if I were showing them to you, right? So what that means is that you're going to need to have some sort of skills with PowerPoint or Google Slides or whatever it is that you use to be able to animate things up and down. Nice enough is that it's pretty easy. You can see what I'm talking about, though, about you need to be able to see what's coming up, right? So for example, I can see right now that the next tip that's coming up is, please don't just copy a big old Excel table and smack it onto a slide, right? That's just lazy. That's why you're doing it, right? That's why I've done it as well. I'm like, well, there it is. How nice for me. It's just that that data doesn't tell any kind of story. You're not presenting data when you do that. What you're presenting is a mess. And in a little bit, we're going to reveal the different types of decision makers and how they use data as they move towards making a decision. And you are wrecking it with the type that really is into numbers. Show them a bunch of numbers, they're going to try and figure it out. The biggest points. Show things one at a time while you're talking about them, and then please don't just paste a big old Excel table and pop it on the screen. You know what I mean? And then the third one, people start talking about, hey, charts and graphs, and if I'm going to be doing data, I need to have charts and graphs, right? This is what's most important about that. If you show somebody a chart and then they have to figure it out, you've just made it worse, right? You haven't made it better. Your pretty beautiful chart is actually confusing people. See, the thing is that a chart or a graph, it's a picture. And you hear people talking about like pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? Really what pictures do is spark our imagination, and we start imagining something being real. We tell a little story in our head, don't we? Whenever you see a picture. See, that's the thing. Charts and graphs are about stories. Charts and graphs aren't about the data. Now, that doesn't mean that that the story can't have data in it. It just means if what you're trying to communicate is number, put the number on the screen, right? Don't make me figure out the chart. A chart instead says something like, look at how much more this one is making than that one is making. Or out of this whole, look how much more we've got there for this part. Or first it went up, and then it went way down, but hey, wait a minute, it went back up, right? There's a story there, isn't there? If we're getting into charts and graphs, I think we have to recognize that looks matter, right? It is a picture. And anybody who ever said that looks don't matter was probably talking to their kids, right? Because we all get that looks do matter. And so let's hit the number one making charts that look good kind of tip here. Let's start with the before here. This is fairly common, yeah? Here's the biggest tip. And it's fairly easy. It's take off anything you don't need. Before. After. We don't need all those grid lines. We don't need a bunch of the titles. We definitely don't need a legend down at the bottom when we can put a legend where it's much more useful, which is on the actual graph part itself, right? And now that we've removed a whole bunch of yuck from the slide, now we can also include the story of the slide. Basically what's going on here is you've got an analyzer machine. These are all the different analyzer machines that are available, and hand analyzation availability, and how long the analyzer itself takes as well. And so what we're saying here is that Tango is pretty close to the operator time, and then the actual time for the test, it does pretty fast as well, right? So the idea here is that we're telling a story and that it looks good. You don't have to be an artist to make something look good. Really, all you've got to do is remove all the yuck that doesn't need to be there, and then make sure that things line up nicely. Hey, by the way, one trick with that is you can absolutely make a chart in Sheets or in Excel and paste it into the slide. Draw boxes on top of the chart, right? So, for example, here on this, here on this chart, we've got this box here and this box here. I could take this and in my slide program, draw a box over this one and another box over this one, right? The rectangular drawing tools are pretty easy. And then after I've drawn what I need, I can delete the main area and just get rid of it. So it really helps to clean it up. Neat, yeah? All right. Let's go back because it's a lot already. What's absolutely most important about data is that you're only showing the data that you're talking about right now. The second thing is, please don't kill us with a great big old spreadsheet. That's breaking the first rule. You're showing all kinds of data that you're not talking about right now. Now, as a caveat there, I know that some of you work for science-based or research-based organizations, right? And some of those people, you can't just show them conclusions. They're like, wait a minute, where's the data? Right? So let's be clear. What you might do is say, we have a whole bunch of data and here's what it looks like. Blam! And you put it up on the screen because that's what you're talking about right now, right? And then you say, okay, so we're going to transition to results. And if we want to pour over the data, we can come back and look at that later. New slide with only the results on it. Making sense? So you can kind of get best of both worlds. And then if you are going to go for charts or graphs or really any kind of picture, recognize that that picture is telling a story and let it tell that story with a minimal amount of going off in the middle of nowhere. Hey, why don't we reach out again and see if there are questions that have popped up in the chat? Carly, anything coming up we might address?
Yeah, David, you addressed a really, Bridget kind of brought up that point of that she has a couple stakeholders that love to see, how did we get there? So I think you just addressed that question beautifully. And then we had another question from Lars, and I think we're going to speak more about this, but what are some techniques around like waking up the audience so that they're following along with those key points as you bring them up? Again, I think you kind of shared them as well with just showing the main point on the slide, but just some techniques for waking people up if you're 15 minutes into it and eyes are starting to glaze over.
Yeah, good. So let's address both of those. Because some stakeholders or leaders, they really do want to see the journey. In fact, in a little bit, we will get to the different types of decision makers. And one of them, they want the whole journey, right? So I think we know who we're talking about there. That's absolutely fine to put on the screen while you're talking about the journey. So here's what we found first. And then when we did regression analysis, this is what we found. Now we did a little bit of poking at that data, and we found that we were missing this point and this point and this point on the screen, on the screen, on the screen, which led us to this, right? So the whole thing is a presentation instead of here's a whole bunch of data. That doesn't help those people who want the story because you're not giving them the story. Making sense, right? All you're giving them is blah, 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 and it confuses them more than it helps. Now, as far as keeping people engaged, what's most important is literally that. It's keeping people engaged, right? So for example, how many of you have been in a presentation where the presenter reached out and asked you what your thoughts were about what's going on? In the chat, can you give me a yes if you had a presenter reach out and directly engage with the audience? In the chat, give me a yes on that. Right? If you haven't, you are right now, so give me a yes, right? The idea is that data is not just about a presentation. Data is about getting something you want. And as we move forward into that, getting something you want is usually more of a conversation than it is a commercial. And so we'll dig a little bit deeper into that as we move forward. Interestingly enough, and I'm going to pop it up on screen here, if you want to engage, the number one thing when we're working remotely, number one, is whether or not you have the camera on and whether or not you can get your audience to turn the camera on. Now, I know that here where we are right now, that's not really an option, right? And at work it is. There's a journal called the Journal of Computers in Human Behavior. Those people are probably fun at parties. And what they're interested in is when people start using computers, how does that change our behavior? They are way into looking for studies and publishing studies that have to do with this kind of communication that we're having, right now. And what they found was that the lack of eye contact, that's where it's at. It's the number one reason that people disengage, what they as researchers call negative disinhibition. When you're disinhibited, when you're uninhibited is how we normally say it, you kind of do whatever, right? Which could be great, unless it's negative. And negative when you're listening to a presentation is doing other work, is not paying attention at all, is messing around with your phone, that kind of stuff, right? Can anybody in here, Oh, you know, I love asking this question. We've got a big audience today, so maybe I'll get my first yes. Can anyone in here honestly say that they've been in a remote meeting with the camera off and they've never done other work? Can anybody say they've never done that? Let's look at the chat. Well, it seems that crickets are the only people who have never done other work with the camera off, because it's almost impossible. It doesn't matter how interested you are. You're just not engaged because you're not having that full human sort of like interactive presentation, right? So if you can, you get people to get those cameras on. It doesn't mean you make them, right? We can encourage it, and at work, we can slowly set ourselves a culture of cameras on. It makes a difference. I know some people don't want to have their cameras on, right? Some people don't want to get dressed in the morning, right? Now, of course, we do have to also be considerate because, you know, in this age, some people live in a studio apartment with 4 other people, and that's a little weird. And so what we're not saying is don't be considerate. And if you can get people to get cameras on, that's number one. That's number one, right? Okay, so let's start moving our way through it. If we're making a data-based presentation, the biggest mistake that almost everybody makes is they say, okay, so I have to go talk about this, or I have to go show the numbers. And that's not what you're doing at all. Unsurprisingly, you show up and you talk about or show, and it's super boring. You're just talking about stuff, right? Nobody shows up to a presentation to hear somebody like show the numbers. They want some kind of information. They want drive. They want to be able to get something out of it, right? And what's neat is you, the presenter, the person who's presenting the data, you're the one who wants to get something out of it too, right? So here's the question. Every single data-based presentation that you start, every single one, the most important question is, what do you, the presenter, want the audience to do based on this presentation, right? Do you want them to make a decision? Do you want them to be able to make a decision? Do you want them to feel confident that David Lieberman knows what he's talking about? Like, sometimes that's my goal. I have this whole presentation so that someone feels confident in me. The thing is if you don't start your presentation with here's what I want, chances are you're not going to get it, right? You know, one of our clients is, a worldwide retailer that everybody's heard of. We don't like to throw the names around, and you've heard of them for sure. And one time we were doing a workshop based on this. We have a whole workshop called the Psychology of PowerPoint. And a woman in the workshop was all excited because her company was just bought by this retailer. It was a little programming team for the online division. And she had a presentation next week with decision makers. When I asked her what the presentation was about, she said, oh, it's I have to show people what my team does and the numbers around that. And I said, oh, great. So what do you want? She was like, and after we talked about it for a little while, what she wanted was that retailer to keep her team. Different presentation? Totally, right? Totally different presentation. So if you're deciding in the beginning, what do I want? Then we can go get it. So remember, we're trying to keep it real today. In our live workshops, we work through real work every time. You leave with something in your hands. You're like, I can't believe I built this today, and can build it again tomorrow. So for this presentation that you're thinking about today, what do you want? What do you want people to do? It's not what do you want them to know. They know something so they can do something. It's what do you want them to do? Do you want them to be able to make a decision? Do you want them to make a particular decision? Do you want them to feel confident? It's okay if you get them to feel a certain thing. It's neat to think about, isn't it? All right, so moving forward then, if you're going to get these people to do a thing, let's talk about them. Usually we go into presentations, especially data-based ones, thinking only about us, right? What do we need? And that sure doesn't help, does it? If you go look up audience analysis questions online, you'll find like there's only 27 questions to analyze your own. Nobody's going to do that, right? These questions are the top 2, right? This comes out of a study of the Journal of Human Behavior. And it's basically, if we're going to get into what audiences are looking for, what are the top 2 questions that are most effective in driving towards that? So if you want to write a thing down, these are good to write down. You already have decided, here's what I want. Question 1 is, well, okay, so what does this audience need to know to do what you want? Right, so this is important. If you want them to be able to make a decision, what do they need to know to make that decision? This will help to really curtail what data you'll be showing and what data you won't be showing, because what they don't need is your big old Excel spreadsheet. What they need is data that helps them make a decision. And there's a lot of thinking that goes into it, isn't it? Right? If you're going to be successful, you need that thinking. And then if you're like me, you like to talk about like all the work you did to prove that you did a lot of work, and you like to talk about your experience, and you like to show all the results because that stuff is fascinating. And then your audience is like, or they're overloaded, or they're not getting what they need. And so the next and most important question is, what will this audience, this one, not care about? Right? Really, really what you might say is, what will this audience not care about that you might have talked about? Right? Nobody wants to hear, and then we did this, 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 and then we did this. Even the people that want the journey, they want like the overall, so they can have confidence that they're not missing something. Right? So what might you have talked about? The most common one is we get a little bit too deep in our experience and the journey. And research shows that what people are trying to show there is that, hey, I did a lot of work. Here's the trick. Tell them how much work you did. My team and I did 47 hours worth of analyzation before we came to blah, 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 blah. Right? Neat, yeah? Okay, so here's what we've got. Man, get that camera on. Please, please, right? If you can, right? Especially for you. And if you can get other people to turn the camera on, that's such a winner. If you start by deciding, what do I want out of this? And what does my audience need to know to give me what I want? Then you have a chance of getting what you want, right? Even if that's just to look amazing. Before we change topics a little bit here, Carly, any questions coming from the audience?
Yeah, David, I think we have 2 to highlight. So I'll start with the one from Mia. This is a really good one. How do you get people to turn on their camera if it's a recurring meeting and the expectation hasn't been to turn camera on previously? So if you're coming from a culture where, camera's off, how do you kind of help maybe change that for your presentation in that meeting?
Yeah, great. So most cultures, especially the whole beginning of this lovely thing that we've all been through, most cultures weren't cameras on cultures, right? And so anytime you make a change, especially you make a change where people are a little uncomfortable with it, and a lot of people are, right? What you might do is use some of the tricks that we employ and then teach in our change management workshops. Commercial, right? So for example, surprise change is never good. So if people show up and you're like, turn the camera on, expect resistance. And so what you might do is sprinkle hints that the change is coming, or not so like subtle hints. So for example, you might start calling it a video meeting instead of just a meeting. Right? So you've got the implanted idea there. And if you or your stakeholders or leaders can start setting the expectation that we're going to move towards a cameras on culture on this date, right? Now people will see it coming up. They've got time to get used to it. There's no surprise. And you for sure want to give them a why. They're really interesting behavioral science studies, social science really, where they have shown pretty conclusively that with a why, people are way more likely to do what you've just asked, right? In fact, it's 68% more likely to say yes when you include a because. What's kind of a trip is that the research shows that the because doesn't really matter so much. There's a study where people were waiting in line at a copy center and somebody came up and tried to cut. And they gave all kinds of different answers about like, hey, can I cut in front of you? I've only got 5 copies. Hey, my cat is in the car. It didn't seem to matter that the reason, just that there was one, was the most important part. What you might consider doing is giving them the reason that we just gave you guys a little bit ago. You can rewind the video about the study in computers and human behavior, right? Either way, so you sprinkle hints. When that first on-camera meeting comes on, let's be a little lenient when we did it. You're like, hey, I can't see you, this person that I'm picturing right now. And they said, oh yeah, I'm in an undershirt. And we said, okay, next time. Right. And they're like, oh, okay. Right. So we set like a slow motion towards making that happen. Thanks for asking. If it is one of the biggest things, it deserves a little bit of getting into it, doesn't it? All right. I just glanced over at the YouTube there, and we've got a what did you want us to do based on this presentation? Interesting question. Okay. Hey, what we're really trying to do is show you that Learnit is a super interesting research-based organization that leads directly to skills and give you some kind of idea about like what our live hands-on workshops are like. Really what we want you to do is reach out to us and buy classes for your organization, right? And so if you want a little bit of transparency, there we go. Oh, I feel so honest today. All right, thank you so much. All right, so hey, let's get a little bit deeper into the psychology of it, right? Because everybody here has made a presentation or brought an idea to a decision maker, and they were all excited. I've got a slide we're going to pop up real quick here. They're all excited. They're like, I've got this great idea. Or you're expecting praise, you know what I mean? And then this guy comes along talking about, he's just not that impressed, or she's just not that impressed. What's going on with that? Well, it turns out that all decision makers really want to see some sort of data in their presentations. And when you get deep into it, there are different types of decision makers. So this comes from a Harvard study where they studied 2,700 executives. I mean, it's Harvard, so they care about executives. And what they were mostly concerned with was what kind of emotional decision maker are these people, right? We're not talking about like, do they have the business needs that they have met? Because most executives, they need to know what the ROI is and all that kind of stuff. We're talking about what emotions do they need to have satisfied to get excited or say yes. If you're a non-emotional decision maker, then you are the only one, because research shows that all decisions are emotional decisions. In fact, people that have traumatic brain injuries to their limbic area, mostly the thalamus, actually, where we have most of our emotions, those people can't really make decisions anymore. And I mean decisions about what to eat for lunch, not great big decisions. So if we're moving forward, in the Harvard study, there were more types of decision makers, and we've kind of distilled them into 3 because nobody can keep 7 decision makers in their brain. Here are the big 3, and then we'll talk about what you can do with them. Right, so when you're bringing a data-based presentation, one type of decision maker is the visionary type. Kind of wondering which type you think you are. We'll ask in a second. Right, a visionary basically keys into stories. They see things happening in their head, and if that turns out great, they're like, yeah, let's do it. They get very excited about adventure and about benefits, right? Wins, that kind of business. You've also got logic-based people. These people, the emotion that they're looking for really is safety, and it's safety in covering all their bases. These people are like, hey, walk me through it. So it's like, first this happens, right? And you're like, yeah, and then this. And they're like, okay, then this happens, and then this happens, right? If you bring them the whole way, then they're like, okay, I'm with it, right? If you leave out big chunks or important data, good luck for those people. Good luck, right? It doesn't matter if they agree with you. They won't feel safe and they won't say yes. It's neat, isn't it? Then the last type is a numbers-based. These people like to see the numbers. Show me the numbers. Now, what's interesting with these folks is that the numbers people giving numbers presentations screw it up more than any other type, right? Because they tend to overload with numbers. When numbers people see a number, they're like, oh, good, unless it doesn't make sense, right? So every piece of the numeric argument needs to make sense, or else why bother? Why bother? You've just confused a person. If you've ever seen somebody say, hey, can I ask a question about this big old spreadsheet that you pasted up on screen? And you're like, yeah, but we're talking about this over there. And they say, yeah, real quick, because in row 3 and column like G or whatever, that's a numbers person who can't let something go when they see it. Here are the big 3 types, Ready? This is how to emotionally satisfy these types by giving them the data that they need. Visionaries, they need to know stories. So this person, this happened, this happened, this happened, and then this happened, and there was growth. And you're like, oh, that sounds great. The logic-based people need you to walk them through it. And the numbers-based people need their numbers. This is how you get all three. You attach a relevant piece of information, a relevant piece of data, usually a number, to each part of your logical argument, right? So for example, we have a office here in San Francisco that we're looking forward to being teaching back in again. We have live classrooms, right? And every day we bake fresh chocolate chip cookies. Do you know that when people are given something surprising that they weren't expecting, that increases whether or not they return to that retailer by 14%? So, I mean, we love cookies, and we also love that sweet, sweet cookie return data, right? If Learnit is this many return customers a year, which leads to this much growth, which leads to this much direct net profit, and we can realize a 14% return increase, that means this much growth, which leads to this much net profit. And if the cookies cost this much and the cost of the cookie, like training and making the cookie, cost this, all of a sudden that's a pretty easy argument to say yes to, isn't it? Especially if you picture you're downtown San Francisco taking a workshop, which is super awesome. And the thing is, like, it's pretty thinky. You know, you do a lot of thinking, and some of it is a little, you're doing emotional intelligence or conflict management. It can get a little, emotional. And you come out on the break and you smell hot chocolate chip cookies, and you're like, that's amazing. And they're still hot, and you're like, mom. You can imagine how you think about Learnit. Did you see me walk you through with a story and a logical progression with a number on each part of the logical progression? When we're doing a data-based presentation, it's not really about, hey, you have to include numbers. It's about, hey, who am I talking to? And if you're talking to a wide audience, you have to hit all three. Let's pause for a second and see if there's a question that Carly might bring, and then we've got one more piece.
Amazing. Thanks, David. We had a good question. I believe it was from Amy or maybe Georgina. When you have all three types of decision makers in the room, maybe someone that's more logic-based, someone who falls into a different category, how do you ensure that you're catching all three, or is that even possible?
Yeah, great question, isn't it? Right. And the chances are that you have all three are pretty high. Right. So for example, hey, real quick, in the chat, which one do you think you are? Do you think you're story or logic or numbers? Story, logic, or numbers? If you had to just sort of pick one. I know we all like all three. It's just which one do we need emotionally satisfied? How about your leader at work, your direct boss? Story, logic, numbers. How about their boss? Sooner or later it gets pretty hard to know, doesn't it? Right? So here's the thing. You hit all three. You tell a story. If the story includes data, now you're doing it, right? If you walk through a logical progression and that logical progression has numbers to it, now you've hit the number, people, and the logical progression. It's not easy. Nobody's saying it is. And you might not do it for like the weekly report. And for a big, important presentation, man, now we're there. Right? So the short answer is you hit all three. If you want to see somebody who's very good at doing this, watch insurance commercials. This is Jeff, and Jeff lives in the Pacific Northwest, where there are this many like weather events every year, and a tree fell on Jeff's house, and he blah, 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 all state. Number. They're pretty good at it. Yeah, they really do, don't they? Okay, so let's sort of tie it all together here. If we're taking a data presentation and we're trying to show data appropriately, and we're not overwhelming people, and we're only showing what we're talking about right now, and we're making sure that it looks nice, and we're doing all this stuff to aim at these types of audiences, how do we catch people? Right? So if our data presentation is based on new communications, right? So we're trying to convince people to do something, or we've got something new. This is the way it works. People pay attention to problems. Now, if you add data to prove the problem is a problem, if people are like, yeah, I don't think it's a problem, then it doesn't matter. You need to prove the problem is a problem, and that's where we start. We use data to say, hey, we've got an issue that we need to pay attention to, and people are like, oh, okay. Problem, solution, problem, solution. So hit them with your proposed solution. Now, when we do that, let's also back up why this solution will work with data. Right? So again, remember, data doesn't mean numbers, although numbers are perfect data. Data means any additional information to prove what you're talking about is true, which really turns the data into evidence, doesn't it? Now you've got a solution. People are like, oh, interesting. Well, would that work? Good. Hit them with that. The next thing we hit them with is, well, would that work? Like, what are the costs? What's the benefits? How's it going to feel at that point? If I came to you and I said, hey, look, we've got this issue, and let me prove to you that the issue is an issue with this piece of data and this piece of data and this piece of data, you'd be like, okay, we do have an issue. What do we do, David? I'll say, thank you for asking, because here's the proposed solution. This is the solution in a nutshell, and this is why we think it'll work. Data, data, data. And you're like, that does kind of sound like it will work. Should I do it? And we'll say, thank you for asking, because what we've got here is, here's how much it'll cost with data. Here's the benefits with data and projections and opinions. And remember, any information is data. And here's how it'll feel. Don't forget the feeling part, right? If we include a story along with this, man, we are doing it. Which brings us to our fourth step here, which is asking for action, right? So based on this, we recommend that you blah, or we recommend that you think about it, or if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. You're basically asking for the action that you want out of that audience. Interesting, isn't it? Well, folks, it looks like we're reaching our time limit here. So thank you so much for hanging out with us. We're going to bring back Carly, and Carly's going to tell you a little bit about how you can engage with the Learnit facilitators basically for free. We have a community where you can reach out to us and get more events like this one. Thank you so much for hanging out. Hopefully what we've really pulled from today is that presenting data isn't about putting a whole bunch of numbers on the screen. It's about deciding what you want. It's about deciding what you need from the people that you want to give you what you want, what they need to be able to do that. And then it's about how to present that data point by point so that we plug into the natural progression of human decision making. All right, everybody. For Learnit, my name's David Lieberman. Thank you so much.
David, thank you so much. I learned so much in that session myself, and I'm really looking forward to actually watching the recording again myself and offsite. So everybody, thank you so much for being here. As promised, we do have some things for you available after the session, including the recording of this session is available in Offsite, which is our newly released and launched online community that is dedicated to helping you foster the skills and connections that you need to thrive in our virtual workplace, and also transition to this next year, and the transition of when we do maybe eventually go back to being in person. So we're really dedicated, as David said, we are a learning and development organization. We work privately with clients, and we also have more in-depth workshops on the topics you heard on today. And so in Offsite, our platform, you can get the access to the recording, and you'll also receive exclusive discounts and offers on those private classes that we do and those public classes that we do. There's also office hours with our instructors. So if you have follow-up questions, we got to a lot of the questions in the chat today, but not all of them. So if you have follow-up questions for us and for David, he is in there. And our promise to you as a member of Offsite is that we will get back to you within 48 hours. So we really do invite you to join us in Offsite. I'm going ahead and share my screen really quickly and just share a quick version of the platform. so that when you get in here, you can kind of get an idea of the immediate benefits that you can get from this platform. You'll see in here, you can see all the events we have coming up. We have a lot of really great programming coming up for you in the next month. You can view our over 1,200 members that we have and growing. And you can also search by topic. So you can see what topics we cover. Again, we cover everything from Excel to skills like we covered today in presentation skills. So ask a question, you can find a video, you have access to instructors that are experts on these topics, and you also have access to each other. So we really do invite you to join us in Offsite, and we'll go ahead and put that link in the chat. And one more item for you as well is that, again, we do host these sessions every week, every Friday. And our theme coming into March is 21st century skills, human skills you didn't learn in school. So this is our lineup for March. Everyone who attends all 4 of these sessions will receive an exclusive badge that you can share on your LinkedIn, that you can share with your employer and your friends, and just show that you're really working to upskill and level up your own skills in this virtual environment. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Please reach out to myself or my colleague Marissa Ruiz in Offsite. You can also email us after the session. We'll include links to Offsite and these sessions via email. But please feel free to reach out to us with questions. And we'll see you in Offsite, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much.